you carried that onto your next office and your next area of operation, which was Miami, right?
That was my first supervisory assignment.
And this was what year?
Oh boy, 1984.
So there's nothing going on in Miami in 1984 with drugs, so you had an easy run, right?
Right, yeah. If you look at my career, I went to all the easy spots, all the easy spots. I tell people, when I went to Miami, my vision of Miami was when you landed at Miami International, they gave you a kilogram of coke and a 9mm.
This is Inside the Life with Giovanni and Dutch, produced by the Mob Museum, presented by Levy Online and Levy Production Group. Giovanni Rocco and Dutch McAlpin are former police and federal task force operatives. They infiltrated drug cartels, outlaw motorcycle groups, and the mafia. Now, they share their stories, along with others who have gone inside the life.
This gives us a little bit of a different look into the life. This one's with Lew Rice. He's going to share his life inside the DEA as not only as an investigator, but just the way he describes being an agent, the cases he worked, how he got into doing some covert operatives, his time in Miami, how he began in New York, Miami, and led on to Kingston, Jamaica. And this one is close to home for me, being from New York, right? And growing up and knowing Frank Lucas's story and Nicky Barnes' story. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's interesting. A 26-year career with the DEA, working undercover, doing investigations, all the way up through multiple supervisory roles. And interesting enough, he identifies during our interview that he spent a long time with Frank Lucas, who a lot of us will know from American Gangster. And, he almost describes an education he got from the time he spent with Frank, which could be used later in his career working undercover or overseas in Jamaica, or just in his totality of investigating large drug cases.
Oh, yeah. And his view of it, he gives a great perspective inside the life. And again, his time through the 80s, coming up in the Cali cartels, the end of the Medellin cartels into the Cali cartels, and his work in Miami was just, it seems like he was on a trajectory for his law enforcement career from the day he was born.
You can sense with him that he's got an internal integrity. His father was a cop, a recognized, respected street cop in New York City.
His dad was his influence to go into law enforcement and the neighborhood. I mean, his desire to want to make a difference drove him. It just, it propelled him through his career. And that's the story that you're about to hear. Thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you, Giovanni and Dutch, for inviting me.
Thank you. It means everything to us.
I look forward to our conversation.
And we look forward to learning all about your career. And, you're a true patriot. The time that you gave, 26 years of law enforcement, and in the time that you were a DEA agent is tremendous. And I like your unique perspective. And when we first got to talk to you, some of the things that you shared as far as the mental and physical stressors, it tugs at our heartstrings because it's something that we want to give a lot of attention to as well.
Sure.
I would like to ask you, at first, how did you become to want to work for the DEA or become a law enforcement officer?
Sure.
Being from the borough of
Queens
in New York. So I could hear it in your accent. So it's nice to be home.
I was born and raised in Queens in New York City. And as everybody knows, New York has 5 boroughs. Queens is one of them. Yeah. My dad was a New York City detective, and I like to say a proud New York City detective, a Harlem detective. Yeah. So he was a guy that well-dressed, well-spoken, and walked around with that swagger. Right. And this is, during the late 60s, 70s, when I was in high school and getting ready to go to college. And there was a lot going on, with African Americans struggling for civil rights, equality in housing, employment, education. And also we had a drug crisis during that time. And, a little bit like now and then back then, the relationship between the African American teenagers and the police was a haphazard relationship.
Okay.
And there was, a lot of distrust on both sides.
Sure.
So, although my dad was a Harlem detective and I loved and adored my dad, going into law enforcement was not my choice. I wanted to maybe go into probation and parole. But it came a point in time when I was going to school and then the Vietnam War was out, and that was another cause of dissension in the country, the war in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. A lot of my friends, went to Vietnam, and these were guys we'd hang out on the weekend, go to parties with the girls, have a good time, a lot of fun. And then when they went to Vietnam, they came back drug addicts. They were addicted to heroin. So they still wanted to go out to parties, hang out with the girls, and have fun, but they wanted to chase heroin. And it destroyed them, but it destroyed their families.
Right.
Because these were parents like my parents that were supporting the civil rights leaders of the day, realizing that they would not benefit as parents, but their children would benefit.
Okay.
And when you have a child and a grandchild, you realize everything is about them, seeing them get off to a good start.
Right.
And I saw the parents devastated. They were depressed. They were crying. They were anguished because they put all their effort in their sons, and they went to Vietnam. They came back drug addicts, either addicted to heroin, committing petty crimes, not going to school, not working, and living unfulfilled lives.
Right.
So in my mind, it crystallized. I said, you know something? When DEA was formed and it was a career day at my alma mater, St. John's University, it was a DEA agent and a personnel specialist now, but now it's human resources, came and they talked about DEA and what it was about, and a single mission agency for narcotics. I said, you know something, I could identify with that job because I'm going to go out and identify and investigate and arrest the people that destroyed my friends.
Right. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. You were talking about growing up in New York at the time.
Yes.
All of those different conflicts were happening. Did the teenage kids in your neighborhood, knowing your dad was a New York City detective, did they treat you different?
They did, and the interesting thing about it is, you know, although there was friction with the police, everybody looked up to the police because the police officers walked with the swagger. They knew the lingo. They could go through the community. They knew the good guys, the bad guys, and whatnot. So I'm not going to say people looked up to me, but it was no animosity. It was like, man, your dad is the man, you know?
Yeah.
And he was a Harlem detective at that. So he walked with that additional swag and additional credibility. So, you know, people were in awe of my dad because he'd talk to anybody. He was an easy guy, talk to anybody. It used to drive me crazy, though. We'd go down to Delancey Street, and the guy would come over and say, look, I got this gold ring for you. I could sell it to you for, you know, like $50 and whatnot. And then my dad would talk, well, what did you do for two? How much for three?
Right.
I said, Pops, let's go. But he would engage in the banter back and forth. So he just loved the interaction with people. And that, you know, my friends saw that also. And in fact, you know, it was a tribute to him when he passed away, and you know, back in the neighborhood, I said, "Man, I just wanted to let you know we all, a lot of us wish your dad was our dad.
Yeah.
He was just a decent guy and would always to help out. What could he do to help you? What could he do to help you?"
Similar background with me as my father. I'm third generation cop, so I know what it's like to have that father, right? And to live up to that. I know what it's like to have the protection of your father being a cop, right? But there's also the respect.
Yes.
My dad was respected as a good cop by both sides of the law. But somehow as a kid, you fall in the middle. And I'm born in, you know, from a neighborhood where most of the kids I hung out with, low income housing. I had family in low income housing. So, you know, they didn't judge my dad. And I learned from, my dad taught me empathy. He raised me hard, but what you're talking about reminds me of my father, that he raised me with empathy to treat people the way you want to be treated, you know, and that was the biggest thing. So hearing you talk about your dad, it makes me think about my own. And that he was, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. My dad was the one who was the spark for me to want to go into law enforcement. Right. You know, but be my own man. Right. I wanted to carve my own path. So is that what you kind of saw yourself doing with DEA?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To go into this organization and, you know, get these guys that are selling drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, destroying communities, destroying families, making substantial amounts of money, but just destroying neighborhoods. And I said, you know, something, we got to do something about that. And in New York during that time, there was a lot of, you know, corruption. You had Serpico, you had, you know, heroin missing from the property clerk's office.
Oh, yeah.
You had a lot of...
the mafia, political corruption in itself.
Everything was going on, and New York was just chaos. And that's why DEA was formed, special agency, federal, to look at, let's go after these drug guys. You know, we have a problem in this country, and then President Nixon coined the phrase, war on drugs. In July 1973, you know, DEA was formed to specifically go after the major drug dealers.
Right. And you become a DEA agent. What office did you work out of in the beginning?
I started in New York.
You did? You got lucky.
8 years in New York, which is always the most difficult office, but the most rewarding office when you're looking at crime and criminal organizations.
Right.
And the spirit and camaraderie amongst the agents, the police officers, and the state police is unbeatable.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You walk into a DEA office today, it's 6 stories,
Right.
30, 40 people on each floor.
Right.
Back then, when you were fresh in New York, how many guys do you guys have?
Oh boy, we had we were headquartered at 57th Street and 11th Avenue. It was, I think, the Ford Lincoln Mercury building. And there's still a car dealership there now. I think it's an Audi dealership, and we were on the 17th, 18th, and 19th floor. So it was a beautiful building, but we were locking people up. We'd come in the back way up the service elevator, and that was a challenge because if you look at DEA offices around the country, they're in nice places, well kept, well manicured. And I'll never forget, we were in Miami, we were having a group meeting, and one of the guys in Miami was a former New York City police officer from the Bronx. And he said, boss, I'm losing my edge down here, because we were in the, in Miami, and I forget what center it was, but it was a beautiful, well-maintained, manicured place, and there were nobody's in uniform.
Right.
If you walked into the building, it'd be any building in corporate America, people going out to their way to be nice and be friendly. And you can lose your edge because you're in the precinct. You see, handcuffs and guns and swagger and uniform. And so
Service
you're always on
elevator.
edge. Right. But in DEA, you can lose it. And I told him, I said, that's why it's a tough job. But you got to be equally prepared, because once you get that call and we're going to the street, your senses got to turn on.
Right.
You got to watch and listen and be prepared.
Yeah.
You got to fight against being lulled into a situation where it's going to be another deal, because it's never another deal. Even though you may have done this deal or deal similar 10 times before and there's been no issue, that 11th time could be a big problem.
Oh, yeah.
So each and every day, each and every deal, you got to gear yourself up.
It's great to hear you describe it like that, because it is. We were on DEA task forces, and I worked out at a Newark office.
Right.
And it's like a corporate America inside the office space, but you're so right in what you touch on, that at any moment you can get a call. Your squad's doing nothing today, but my squad's got a hit, and then all of a sudden you're on.
Right.
Right. And you go from being we used to say a house mouse. I'm doing house mouse work, right? I'm just doing some secretary work. I'm doing some intel. I'm building my case or whatever. And then all of a sudden, you guys are going to knock a door down,
Right.
and it's on like Donkey Kong, right?
That's right.
You have to go into that mindset and completely switch and pivot.
That's right. Because when you think about it, Giovanni, narcotics is a specialty assignment in all of law enforcement.
That's right.
Right.
People rotate in, rotate out because of the danger and the corruption factor.
Yeah.
DEA is a single mission agency. The leadership has to be very in tune to make sure that the agents don't get overexposed.
Right.
Because a lot of times the agents won't understand that they're overexposed, but a good supervisor will say, hey, we need to take this agent out for a while.
Right.
He's getting too close.
Yeah.
He can't read the danger signs.
Yeah.
It's a tough job. Extremely
is.
tough.
What was
job.
one of the biggest cases you worked when you first went to New York at the DEA?
During that time, I was doing a lot of undercover work. And each undercover case had its own dynamics and changes. And it's sort of like undercover work was the way you infiltrated organizations.
Right.
You had to go into somebody else's neighborhood. You had to convince them that you were a criminal like they were. And you'd have to engage them, and hopefully you'd pay them and they'd give you the drugs, and you had a prosecutable case.
Right.
But it's not like on TV where everything happens in 45 minutes.
No.
Right.
I could tell you most of the times we'd go out there, even a pre-planned meeting to buy, let's say, an eighth kilogram of heroin back in the 1970s, which was maybe about $6,000-7,000 in 1970s.
Right. It's a big guy.
You meet the guy at 2:00. He may show up at 2:30, and it may be 8:00 before you got the heroin, because everybody didn't have heroin, those large amounts of heroin.
Yeah.
So at all that time, you're under stress, trying to negotiate, going back and forth. So the stress factor is just extremely, extremely high, and the surveillance is out there.
Oh, yeah.
The surveillance is out there too, and they're watching, and they're trying to anticipate. Is the deal going? Is the guys trying to rip you off, or what's going on to try to protect you? So there's just a lot of dynamics going on there,
Right.
And you're trying to maintain your cover. But the longer you're with these guys, the more opportunity that your cover could get blown by you saying something that you shouldn't have said, or somebody seeing something that they're somebody on surveillance they suspect that they're tying that person to you. So the risk factor is going up extremely high each and every time.
Every time. And you know what a lot of people don't understand is that in our world of working undercover, we have to please both sides of the fence.
Right.
The bad guys, right? The targets that we have and we're planning a meet with, but then it's taking 4 or 6 hours. And you're right. Everything you describe is perfect, right? I lived those deals where you're waiting and waiting and waiting and go, what are we doing?
Right.
You're talking about surveillance and all that stuff. What kind of people were you buying from? Were they carrying guns? Like, is there like a kind of take us through like what that would look like?
So I could tell you, one of the cases I did in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Stanton and Ludlow, which now is a gentrified area. It's just beautiful down there. But back in the 70s, it was heroin central. Everybody had heroin down there. They believed the police, the 9th Precinct, they rode 3 in a car. That's how dangerous it was down there for homicides and drugs, heroin in particular. And we had made a plan to purchase an ounce or 2 of heroin from a guy, and we were going to let the case go. And I remember going down there to the restaurant, and when I went inside, they ushered me to a back door that you would not know unless you owned the restaurant. And we went downstairs and negotiated down there. Now, when you think about negotiating with a drug dealer on their territory, either in their house or either in their restaurant.
Now they're in their basement.
Now in the basement, and they're in control.
Right.
And you have no idea how many people are down there,
Yes.
how many people are going to show up down there, but they know you're coming with a substantial amount of money. So the risk factor against you has risen dramatically.
Right.
But during the course of the conversation down there, with the principal guy I was negotiating with, he mentions that he's leaving, he's going out of the country. And in my mind, I'm thinking that I'm going to give this guy money, he's going to go out of the country, he's going to become a federal fugitive, and we're never going to see him.
Right.
And I said, hey, maybe we should change this into an arrest situation, and I had a wire on me, but you're in the buildings in New York City. The communications were not as sophisticated.
Wearing like a Kel or something like that.
Yeah. So everybody knew the danger signal, and was Montana. The word Montana.
Okay, yep.
And for those that don't know, when we're doing these undercover cases, there's a pre-meeting ahead of time, and so all the agents that are going to be on surveillance meet, and we discuss the operation. Now, the bad guys don't have the plan that we have, but we have our plan. And our plan is designed to secure the evidence, the heroin in this case, but also to protect the undercover agent and to protect the defendants also, because we don't want to see anybody get hurt. And so my danger word was Montana. And so it's a word that I would use in a sentence that hopefully would not raise any alarm, the word Montana. But if you were at that pre-meeting, come in, it's over. That meant come in, guns blazing.
Right.
And so as I'm down there and I realize this guy's leaving and going to the Dominican Republic, I start saying Montana, looking at the heroin, saying, boy, this looks good stuff. This looks like we could use this in Montana. I said, and I constantly saying the word Montana.
Nothing's happening, right?
Nothing's happening, but hopefully maybe they'll get one of these Montana, so I can keep saying Montana, Montana.
Let's talk about that Kel, because a Kel is this, big square device, got batteries on the
device.
back, got an antenna about that long, burns your skin.
Which was strapped onto my waist underneath my shirt. And so it's uncomfortable to wear, but that's the best technology we had.
Yep.
And as a transmitter, it allowed the surveillance team hopefully to hear what was going on. And so by me keep repeating that word Montana, hopefully somebody would hear, even though we didn't expect to be any problem, they'd hear Montana and said, okay, there's a problem. We got to go in there.
Right.
It's funny how Montana comes up faster and faster.
How many
and faster,
times can you say Montana, right? And being in those shoes, it always happened.
I'm telling them, boy, this stuff looks good. I could use this in Montana. This is some good stuff. And, you keep saying it but then at some point I hear boom, 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 boom. Now I'm downstairs and I hear steps, running upstairs.
Yeah.
And I realize that these guys are seeing what I'm seeing. They're wondering, well, we saw him go in there. We know he's here, but where is he? Because there's a secret door. And then finally, they get to the door. And as they get to the door to arrest this guy, he pulls a gun out of his waistband towards the arrested agents. And simultaneously, I was just able to grab his gun, the revolver, and push it to the side. I said, "You don't need this." Mm-hmm. And then they came in and made the arrest. The second guy, after we made the arrest, said he was in the Air Force, and he knew something was wrong when he heard Montana.
Right.
He said, "I was in the Air Force. And I'm used to code words." He said, "You kept saying Montana. I knew something was wrong."
Yeah.
But my supervisor, who was a legend in federal law enforcement, if they ever write the chapter on federal law enforcement, DEA, and predecessor agencies, if they ever write the book on that, he'll get a whole chapter.
Right.
He was a Silver Star medal winner in the U.S. Army, fought in Vietnam, and came back and joined DEA and doing that same fight on the street. He was so impressed with me, and as right at the academy, maybe 23, 24 years old. That night he wrote a nice letter of what happened and sent it up to the front office. So all the leadership in the New York office saw the letter, and the guy in charge of the office, the regional director, sent it back and said, "Put this agent in for a monetary award." Right. So it was a great reinforcement for me. And in all jobs, there's certain things you do to quote unquote make your bones. In DEA in the 1970s, working undercover and having a drug dealer sell you heroin or cocaine or any narcotics was making your bones.
Sure.
Because then you were able to transmit from your world to their world, and they believed you, and now they're going to be subject of a federal investigation and a federal arrest.
Right. So. And again, I want to give you enough credit because I don't think everybody understands the situations you put yourself in. So just to draw the picture, going into those buildings in New York, how many times did you go into buildings, or I did, you went in this door, went in the basement, the door locked behind you, you can hear the door locked behind you, or somebody locked it behind you. And then when you went in the basement, the problem was in different boroughs, they broke holes, or the buildings were connected down in the basement. Right. So your team watched you go into 123 Main, right? But you wound up 4 doors down.
Right.
And now you completely lost your, because again, the Kel that we're talking about was the direct line of sight. You had the antenna that came up and this little tiny microphone, right? And we taped it to either our shirt or our skin with hospital tape or whatever. Half the time when you sweat, it fell off, right? So you're managing all this stuff. And then your team is outside. At least when I started, it was reel to reel. Guys sat in the car, and then we progressed to cassette tapes, and we had that old suitcase that opened up, and they had to have a direct line of sight. Problem is, in the concrete canyons of New York, you lose that signal before you even go in that building. So I just want to set the tone to tell you what Lew put himself in the situations. We all did at one point, but at that time frame and all the stuff that was going on, like you said, the social discourse, the mob running everything, who's ripping off who, and the heroin, it's just everybody's looking to rob everybody.
That's a great point, Giovanni. As we sit back now and go through these cases in our youth, you say to yourself, what the hell was I thinking? Right. And when I talk about my first supervisor, he would always say and admit, he said, I like guys like Lew in my group. They're in early 20s and not married, no kids and whatnot. Right. So the only thing they're thinking about is the job.
Right.
He said, meanwhile, I got other guys in the group. They're married. They got a couple of kids. They're thinking about the kids, has to go to the dentist. Daughter needs braces and whatnot. He said, maybe they're not going to be as gung-ho as some of the younger guys.
You talked about making your bones. Going into that basement, it's scary. You got the pit in your stomach. But one of the biggest fears isn't with your life. It's failing.
Yeah.
Everybody's wanting you to make your bones, and they're just expecting you're not going to do it right. So there's all kinds of outside pressures.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. I could tell you as I reflect back, spending all that time and down in the Lower East Side, it was just that was something we did. And that's how you made your reputation. You were the guy taking the group out to arrest federal drug dealers, and going to court, working with the prosecutors. But to get there during the undercover work was the most dangerous part about it.
Right.
You said they were Dominican. Do you speak Spanish?
No.
So they could speak English, and there's a whole nother issue there. And sometimes you're dealing with guys, and you're interpreting their body language, you're interpreting their facial expressions, and where the money is and what's happening. And you're interpreting the dope deal because we don't know exactly what we're saying to each other. That happened to me more than once, I know.
No, and as the progression into the cartels come into play, right? And as the progression started with the different dialects, remember the Cuban dialects, Colombian dialects, Dominican dialects. Not that you spoke fluent, but you had to have an understanding culturally.
Right.
There was so much you had to stay on top of.
And that's why when you talk about inside the life, the informant, or we call them the source, is so critical.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Because that's the person that's going to take you to the level and give you that respect. And if that person has enough respect, you're not going to be second guessed or second questioned. People are going to assume you have to be legitimate.
And you're not always the guy to pick the source.
No.
Right?
No.
We were just brought into cases along the way, and I would assume you had the same thing where you were just given us, this is the source, this is Lew, you have 3 minutes, build a relationship for the last 30 years and how you know each other, and then we're going to go in 5 minutes.
Fortunately with DEA is that if we had the source and the case was successful, we made some arrests, and then the pressure is to get those arrested guys to have them cooperate. And if they did cooperate, that became our source. So you had a vested interest in seeing the case go and developing the relationship with this guy.
Right.
And you knew a lot about him during the course of the investigation, going back and forth. And now you became his best friend because you're the one that's going to stand with him before the judge and say, give this guy a break.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to watch that dynamic play itself out is just fascinating to see, a source that now is going back to the people that he knows, he's lived with. He knows their parents, he knows their brothers and sisters. Their mother made dinner for them Sunday, but now he's taking me as a federal agent to meet them and knowing that they're going to go to federal prison.
They got a lot of emotion and investment in that too.
Well, the times I've gotten called from local police about a source I had who was drunk and fighting and fighting the cops, and and I talked to him, he's wrestling with, his life is over. He's given up all these people, and sooner or later they're going to get arrested. Where's he going to go?
Yeah.
And everybody we work with is not a proponent for the witness protection program.
No.
And we take a vested interest in the sources. We don't just use them and throw them away like trash.
No.
And again, it's hard as an undercover, as an operative. You're relying on this person. This source is now the equivalent of your partner that can't be there with you. So your life does depend, and vice versa. So you do build that relationship, and you have a empathy for that person. You build a somewhat of a relationship where when they do go to prison, that takes its toll mentally and physically on you as an operative. I would assume you start to learn the inner workings with their family. You start to process that, and it's not an easy thing.
Because you realize when you're working undercover with that source, if somebody's going to get hurt, it's you and that source.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you're that source knows these guys a lot longer than you have, and if somebody can divert attention away from you being the man, it's going to be that source.
I have literally had my life saved by sources. And I've literally in the middle of an op negotiated for my life as well as theirs, and then come out with that, and then to get the guys on the other side, our guys on Team America, the agents and the backup go, what are you doing with this guy? What are you, best friends? What are you this? What are you that? And it puts seeds of doubt in your brain, like, oh my God, am I going to the dark side? Am I caring too much for this person? No, you're just human. So you're constantly struggling with that moral issue.
Why that source development is so important. To understand how to use sources, understand when sources are burned out, understand when sources may be telling you something you want to know, but maybe it's something you don't do. But to teach agents not to get too close to sources. I mean, we had
count on them.
We had a situation as you just described, Giovanni, where the agent was tight with the source. The source was making a lot of cases. The source was getting paid. Agents were his career was going up the ladder and whatnot. But then the source, he's got nobody to give up anymore because the word's out in the neighborhood that he's giving people up. So, but the
He's
agent,
a snitch at that point.
Exactly, big time. But the agent's still close to him, and the agent's still feeling for him, and the agent starts lending him money.
It's personal.
When you go from New York, what's your next office?
Kingston, Jamaica.
You go right from New York to Kingston,
Yeah,
Jamaica.
after 8 years, and it was a competitive assignment. A lot of people wanted to go overseas, and that's a great thing about DEA being international agency. And I was selected to go to Kingston, Jamaica.
You put in for it. You wanted it.
I did.
Okay.
I did want it. It was very competitive.
Right.
The guy that was over there was a legend out of New York.
Yeah.
I happened to see him when he was coming back from Jamaica to go down to testify in the Southern District in Manhattan. And we just had a casual conversation. And he knew I had put in for it. He didn't promise me I got it. He said, "Oh, that's good. You know, it's a great job down there." And then lo and behold, within 30 days, I was told I got the assignment. So,
Is Jamaica considered a hardship?
no. It could have been in the State Department, but for DEA, it was considered one of the best assignments. I mean, because assigned to the U.S. Embassy, you only go see the best of the country.
Right.
You know, and places you may think of a hardship, you only go see the best. And then you realize the power of the U.S. Embassy in a foreign country, that locals look up to people in the U.S. Embassy. Some of the best advice I received before I went to Jamaica was one of our leaders in Washington. I went in there and talking to people about what's going on in the country now, what DEA's mission is. He told me Jamaicans, like most foreign countries, they get credibility by being associated with the U.S. government. He said, sometimes you'll be tired, you've worked all week, you just want to get home and relax, and they'll invite you to some social event. You know, and it's not a big deal and whatnot, but the advice I'm going to give you, go. He said, because it's going to help you.
Kind of
it's gonna help
ingratiate and
DEA,
socialize. And
it's going to help the U.S. Embassy.
Yeah.
He said, because you're now giving them, bragging points that, hey, we had a guy from the embassy come in, and you're giving credibility to their event. They said, you may not think about it like that, but they do. And so I would go. And then I find out that, life's all about the relationship. You treat people well, they treat you well.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot of liaison work in the beginning, a little bit of casework.
Yeah.
You're overseeing stuff.
A lot of casework for the U.S. agents,
Yes.
That were working with pilots flying into and
Transport
Jamaica at that
stuff.
time had 80 illegal airfields,
Right.
And so they were constantly, the Cessnas were coming in, loading up with 800 pounds of marijuana to fly out. We give them the coordinates, and they'd leave a couple of bales on the ground for the Jamaican military and the police to take to prosecute those, because they didn't have a conspiracy. They had to have actual, marijuana on the ground.
Right.
And then they'd follow the plane back into the U.S. and arrest those guys there.
kind of to set the tone too. Like I lived down in Puerto Rico for a while, and there's international agencies established there as well. But differences like just being out in the community, or like going on a raid, or like a search warrant. You know, these guys would roll 3-4 armored vehicles. Right. Everybody's full kitted up. They're carrying full automatic weapons and stuff. You know, it's a different territory. It's a different experience. And
Big time.
What's it like just rolling around day to day versus hardship New York City and Jamaica?
Jamaican police, the Jamaican Constabulary Force, the only police force in the world that patrol with M16, you know.
Yeah.
But the people are just super people. Whatever you needed to get done, you get done.
Right.
You know, I remember going down to talk with the Deputy Commissioner of Crime. We subscribe information. We had a telephone number. We wanted to know who is the owner of this telephone number. And you couldn't call a telephone company like you did in New York to get it done. You had to actually go down there and then meet somebody. And they'd want to know what was going on in the U.S. You know, they read the International Miami Herald, and so they were up to speed on what was going on in the U.S. And I remember the Deputy Commissioner of Crime talked about, watching in the U.S. when I think it was John Mitchell, the Attorney General at that time for President Nixon, went to federal prison.
Right.
And I remember the Jamaican police leader told me, he said, that would never happen in this country. He said, we knew democracy worked in your country when the Attorney General went to federal prison. He said, because in this island of Jamaica, the Attorney General, not that he was corrupt, he said, but because of the stature of the Attorney General, would never go to prison no matter what the evidence was.
Wow.
He said, but we knew democracy worked, you know. And again, during that time, when I went to Jamaica, the election had changed. Michael Manley was out. Edward Seaga was in. Seaga was considered a friend of the U.S., so the U.S. wasn't going to push him on the narcotic issue.
Okay.
So we had to do what we could to facilitate cases from agents coming in from around the country, coming into Jamaica. And I tell you, because we were assigned, it was a small office, about 3 of us assigned to the embassy, what we would tell the agents is, don't fly into Kingston, make your own hotel reservations in Montego Bay or Ocho Rios, and we'd meet them at a restaurant in Ocho Bay or Montego Bay, because in a small island, everybody knew we were assigned to the embassy. We had diplomatic plates on the cars, and people would watch. They'd watch who we met, and they don't have to know 100%, but they build their own scenario. Oh, you're meeting this person at the airport. That means, you must be doing some type of investigation on drugs. And because a lot of people had made a lot of money off drugs. It wasn't considered a taboo in Jamaica. Jamaican people were real super. Grandma gives you some marijuana ointment if you have a stomach ache. They didn't have addicts on the streets and all that other stuff. So this was something that Jamaican police in the early 80s making maybe $6,000 a year, right? Okay. And exchange rate maybe is 4 to 1. So you got some trafficker that says, here's 2 crisp $100 bills. Just don't be in this area at 6 o'clock. That's it. Right. So they were doing the best they could with what they had, but really, really supportive and really some super people. I mean, it was some of the best people I've ever met, the Jamaicans.
Now, I would imagine you're putting out fires too along the way, right? With the agents that are doing operations. Back then, you didn't have as many, so much oversight, right? You were probably a little bit more freer what you did operationally, where you wanted to fly, where a Cessna was going to land. So I'd imagine you had some opportunities where some case agents or some undercovers really didn't give you a heads up that they were going to land or come in.
We had that because we were the law enforcement agency in Jamaica, and everybody wants to be independent coming in, and then sometimes they come in and then they get stopped by the Jamaican military and whatnot, and then they had to go to the ambassador. So we had a couple of dust-ups with another federal agency that wouldn't give us the complete tail number of the complaint, so it couldn't really follow it. Or they'd give you the information at the last minute, so there's nothing you could do about it. So, we just got it and whatnot. And then when the Jamaican military would stop the plane to force it down, then they'd contact the ambassador. The ambassador was, he wanted everything to be friendly, and he didn't want these headaches and whatnot that other agencies would establish. And he'd tell these guys, hey, you guys are coming in here to do operations. DEA's here every day. I know these guys. I trust these guys. If they're not blessing this operation, you're not going to be able to do it.
So after your time in Kingston, your diplomatic experience you now have, you carried that on to your next office and your next area of operation, which was Miami, right?
That was my first supervisory assignment.
And this was what year?
Oh, boy, 1984.
So there's nothing going on in Miami in 1984 with drugs, so you had an easy run, right?
Right, yeah. If you look at my career, I went to all the easy spots, all the easy spots. I tell people, when I went to Miami, my vision of Miami was when you landed at Miami International, they gave you a kilogram of coke and a 9mm. Yeah. Because everybody had large amounts of coke and money. I mean, there was no more sophistication. You'd go down to South Beach and the high-end hotel, you talk to the concierge, and before the night's over, you can get, I'm talking about personally, coke, you can get kilos of coke. Right. I mean, it was washing up on the shores with the high-speed boats coming in from the Bahamas. I mean, everywhere. Right. I mean, we would struggle to get a couple of kilos in New York and Miami, 30 kilos, 50 kilos, 100 kilos, and whatnot. And the U.S. Attorney's Office is getting overwhelmed with prosecuting all these cases. I mean, it's just so much drugs.
I met some guys from Miami who said they didn't even count money anymore. They just weighed it.
Right.
Because it takes so long to count that much cash and put all that evidence into wherever. They just leave it on a pallet, weigh it, call it good.
We had an issue. You're going out at 6 o'clock in the morning to do a major roundup, right? You arrest these guys, you bring them back to the office, you got to take a personal history, right? You got to fingerprint them, and then you got to try to get them to cooperate, right? So 6 o'clock in the morning, now it's 10 o'clock at night, and you got all this money. So now there's nobody to count the money but the same guys that have been up at 6 o'clock at night. So now you count the money. Oh, yeah. You put it, what our count was, you put it in the depository, take it down to the bank the next day. They count it, and the count is always off.
It's always off.
And once the count is off, we got to call Washington because it could be an integrity issue.
Yep.
So then Washington would send some guys down there to do an investigation. They got to talk to everybody, count the money. And it was just guys were tired. They're not money counters. Right. And so we had to go to a program. I mean, it sounds crazy, where you'd take the money, you'd put it in the envelope, you'd seal it, witness it by the second agent, and you'd put undetermined amount of cash. Right. Now that sounds crazy because people say, well, nobody knows how much money is going to be in the beginning, but it was the only way practically to operate. You shut the whole office down. Right. I mean, there was no way the count was going to be right. Once it went to the bank with the money counter, it was always
That's
off.
the number then, though.
It was always off. So now it was one number.
Yeah.
But it would send a message to somebody, well, if you take a couple of 100,000, well, who's going to know? But that's why that training is so important.
Yeah.
You have to have a little bit of trust, and you got to be practical, because there's no special unit to count the money, and it's always going to be different. Always going to be different.
That's some common thing. It takes a long time to count $100,000 in $20 bills.
And that was the time that money laundering became a target of these guys, because it was just so much money, with drugs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, suitcases filled with money, with money.
Just
And,
bags.
and then you think about Miami with the Santeria, where drug dealers figured that they get a religious blessing with the Santeria. You go through some of these houses with the shrines, and you see hundreds and thousands of dollars just
stacked up right in front of them.
So the Santeria is a religion, I guess in the Caribbean countries and whatnot, that a lot of the drug traffickers would adopt also. And they'd have a shrine in the house with maybe fruit, but always large amounts of money. And, the agents, I mean, we weren't getting paid a lot of money. We were living paycheck to paycheck. And you may have $20 in your pocket, and you walk into a shrine with, thousands of dollars and whatnot. And, but, you're saying to yourself, it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk. But that was an experience in Miami. As you go, different cultures and different ways of doing things, and you find out different is not wrong. It just, elevates your way of understanding how this whole thing goes. And especially if you're looking to move up in an organization, all that experience that you're gaining is going to help you as you elevate in the organization and make decisions and relate to the agents and the police officers and the issues that are going on currently.
Like you said, you touched on something and said New York. I mean, a New York score, right, of weight back then, 1984, you got 8 kilos of coke. That was a major score back then in New York.
Yeah,
right?
in New York.
Right.
In New York.
Miami on
But
the
then
other
you go
hand.
down to Miami, and
Right.
I mean, there was so much going on in Miami in terms of cocaine that the special agent in charge had 2 groups, one for east of the Mississippi, one to west of the Mississippi,
Right.
to handle on it, because Miami was like a foreign country for cocaine.
Yeah.
It was just so much going on there. And the Vice President Bush had his vice presidential task force in Miami also, to get all the federal agencies, pretty much DEA, FBI, and Customs together to really identify and investigate these guys.
Right.
They were massive organizations. But I'm convinced now, as I look back, that as sophisticated as the Colombian cartels were, that they would send a plane load into Miami, have somebody alert, and we'd seize 1,000 kilos of cocaine, and we're slapping 5, taking pictures at the press camera, smiling, and then 10 planes are going in, boom, 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 boom,
distraction.
right after another, right after another.
Yeah.
I'll give you 1,000, move in 10,000.
These guys are smart. I mean, these guys are very. I mean, we seize ledgers, where they take, application in the home country of people that are working for them, who their parents and relatives are, and to make sure that, hey, we have all this information. So if you cooperate, we're going to get these people back home.
They own them that way.
And the lawyer that comes to represent you, you don't have to worry about it. But the lawyer's not looking out for them. The lawyer's looking out for the organization.
Yep.
But what I saw also is dramatic change. In the 70s, everybody went to trial, no matter what the evidence was. You could have photographs, recorded conversation,
Right.
undercover buys and whatnot. Guys took their chances. Organized crime control bill with minimum mandatories. Some guys took their chances, but a lot of smart guys said, "Hey, let me join America's team."
They started seeing the plea deals
Exactly.
look pretty attractive.
You have mob bosses, leaders of organizations turning on everybody,
Flipping.
because they realize that, hey, the government's going to be my best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And during that time, you're talking about the Cali cartel, Medellin cartel is in power at the time.
Yes.
I came on the job in 90, and I remember the operations we did. It wasn't just to chase dope, right? We did money remitters, tracking the money, tracking the assets. And in Miami, I would imagine there was tons of assets, the boats, the planes, the things that people drove, the cars they drove in the 80s.
Yeah.
So you didn't just look at the dope end of it. You had to look at the assets. There's so many different investigations you ran at the same time.
Real estate, banks were taking all the money. I mean, we got into that a little bit about know your customer with the
Right.
banks, because the banks were just taking money. They weren't asking. Guys were bringing suitcases hundreds of
Right,
thousands of dollars worth of money. Banks are asking no questions to put it in there.
And some of the banks were in on it,
That's
right?
right.
You know,
That's
when you
right.
have that much money coming into a branch and, you know, millions of dollars being dropped off a week.
But the good thing about U.S. law enforcement, once they identify a problem, you know, they educate the Congress or congressional leaders, and they place the laws in there.
Get some
'Cause you
legislation
couldn't
changes,
move, back then you could move large amounts of money back in different accounts. Now you move anything over $10,000, you know, there's got to be
Generate
an
a
account.
report. It's
And
mandatory.
CTR, that's right. A currency report. And now the government looks at also if you're trying to structure it and move a lot of transactions under the $10,000.
Right.
So they're trying to figure out, is there some illegal activity going on there?
Right,
To keep
right.
everybody on the straight and narrow.
And I don't want to lose sight of how violent it was during your time there, too, the investigation wise, and what you had to process. I remember when I came out, you know, in that time when the cartels were around, when they did home invasions, they would line entire families up, you know, and I remember the scenes that I walked in on from youngest to oldest, and they would just slaughter everybody in the house and do it neatly. I don't know if you remember, but they would literally line the families up. I remember in the kitchen and living room just to send a message. So you're surviving in a world, and I don't want to lose sight of what the stressors that you went through at that era, and it was so violent.
Giovanni, extremely dangerous. I mean, DEA formed in each of its divisions. I think the way we carved up the United States back then was 22 offices around the country, handle all 50 states. And each office had a red rum group, which is murder spelled backwards. Okay, and that was specifically to target the homicides related to narcotics trafficking. And so it was composed of DEA agents who knew the cartels and the organizations, and homicide detectives from the local city where the Red Rum Group was established. To specifically target that, to keep the violence down. Because what we found with a lot of these groups, innocent people were getting killed. And in Miami during that time, you had the Dadeland Mall where these guys, you know, did the same operation in the United States I did in Colombia. In the United States, hey, we don't shoot people in malls and public places and whatnot. And if you do, we're going to go into overdrive to find you and bring you guys to justice. To let you know you're not going to export that type of violence here. You know?
Yeah, it's not easy because the cases you're working, you had it in every case. There's murder, there's mayhem.
That's
and
the
innocence.
essentials of drugs.
Yeah.
Guns, violence, a lot of jail time.
Right.
And that's why the risk is always high.
Right.
No matter who you're talking to. Somebody can say, oh, this guy, you know, he's nobody and whatnot. But if you're dealing in drugs, hey, the penalties are high if he gets caught. And there are always a group that's going to try to take his money or take his drugs. And the stress is already there. And the guns are, you know, part of the, like if somebody has a briefcase, you know, drug traffickers have guns.
A desperate man makes a dangerous man.
That's right.
You know?
Well, at the level of drugs we're talking about, you know, your 20-year minimum prison sentences. You probably owe money.
Right.
You probably have no contingency for your family or anybody else to make any money and continue to take care of your children and your wife. And so we always say, what would you do to feed your family? That's a dangerous person.
Right.
That goes back to I want to rewind a little bit back to when you were a special agent in New York. Not all the experience on a job at the time yet. You're a young agent, and you get an assignment to sit with Frank Lucas. Right. As a young agent. Right. That's pretty intense. So you didn't have the experience for those mental stressors, and you're back there at that time. You were sitting with him while he was preparing for trial, right?
Yeah,
So
it was
18 months you spent with him.
I was preparing Frank to testify in federal court for about 18 months. And it was the only case he ever testified in.
Right.
And as a young agent, that was a unique opportunity.
Sure.
But I was assigned the case because I did a great job putting some major drug dealers in a penitentiary, and they felt it would be a good match with me working with Frank Lucas.
Okay.
And at that time, we had a group of agents assigned to the Eastern District Courthouse, and we had the Southern District Courthouse, and I was amongst the group at the Eastern District Courthouse.
Okay.
So working with a federal prosecutor, you know, the New York City Police Department came over, and they explained to me and the federal prosecutor that they had spent over a year delivering Manite and quinine to Harlem drug dealers.
Okay.
And Manite and quinine are the essential diluents used to cut heroin.
Right.
And although they had photographs, they had some recorded conversation, not a lot, of these deliveries over a year, there was no state statute to prosecute them for narcotics trafficking.
Okay.
because it was just cut.
Because
It
it's
wasn't
cut.
an actual
That's
narcotic.
it.
They can't prosecute
It's
cut.
nothing illegal.
Yeah.
But we had a pretty, smart prosecutor, and he was willing to try something different. And that's important because most prosecutors wanted a safe case. They don't want a case where they may lose because they want a no loss record.
Right.
But he was pretty aggressive. He had tried a lot of the large Colombian conspiracy cases, and he said, "I'm going to try these guys, and I'm going to indict them for violation of federal narcotics laws."
Mm-hmm.
And the theory of the government's case is going to be this: they're paying 10 times the normal amount for Manhattan quinine. All of these guys have been previously convicted of heroin trafficking.
Right.
And Manhattan and quinine are the essential diluents to cut heroin.
Right.
Okay? So technically, he was comfortable with indicting them for the federal narcotics laws. But we knew, since this was going to be a New York jury and a Brooklyn, New York jury at that,
Right.
they're going to say, where's the beef?
Right.
And so I did some research internally, and I found out that Frank was cooperating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It wasn't very much well known, but he was cooperating. And two things with that. There was a group of agents that investigated Frank, and they didn't want Frank to get any credit for cooperating, because when Frank was arrested and close to $300,000 was seized from his house in Teaneck, New Jersey, when his wife threw it out the back window in a duffel bag.
Right.
Frank claimed it was twice as much money, and he said the agent stole his money.
Okay.
Okay, and because of that, that allegation had to be investigated.
Mm-hmm.
So promotions were denied, careers were sort of blemished, and some people thought that maybe these guys steal that money, because again, this is during the 70s when you had a lot of corruption and law enforcement, and was all related to narcotics. But what the bosses did, because the bosses in New York City drove out to Teaneck, New Jersey, once they found out the large amount of money, and remember it's 1970s, corruption everywhere.
Yeah.
They went out there and they told the agents and the police officers, "I want you to stand single file, and I want the guy in back to search the guy in front."
Wow.
And these guys were like, "Hey, what do you mean? You don't trust us?" And they said, "Look, we do trust you, okay? But you guys realize what's happening in the papers every day on corruption. So we want to be able to say we searched everybody and nobody had any
Way to
money."
mitigate it. Any accusations that come in.
So they did. And so when that allegation, Frank made that allegation, picked up weight, they were comfortable, the bosses in New York, from driving out to Teaneck, New Jersey, and said, "This is what we did in light of that conversation."
Wow.
But there were a whole bunch of agents that were around during that time that they could care less about Frank. They said the guy should never get any cooperation, credit for cooperation, because look what he shamed. He shamed innocent people, and their careers were delayed. We had a case to proceed, and I understood that, and these guys are a lot more senior than I was. But, we needed his information, and he put the whole thing together.
Right.
So we had went out to, at that time, the federal government had several federal prisons around the country where they put protective witnesses.
Okay.
One was in New York City, and there was one on the West Coast. I think it was San Francisco. So we flew out to San Francisco, spoke to Frank, told him who the defendants were. He knew all of them, did business with all of them, large amounts of heroin. So we brought him, had the marshals bring him back to New York City, and I'd meet with him every day, even on Saturdays. We'd take him up to the courthouse, let him sit in the witness chair to get him familiar and accustomed to being in the courthouse, and let him know these guys are going to come after you all different ways, but you got to stick with the facts and the evidence. And probably the most important thing is when you're dealing with an accomplice witness, especially of that magnitude, what we told him, and I said, me and the prosecutor told him is, don't help us with the case. We only want to know what you did, because if you embellish, these guys are going to know it,
Right.
and it's going to come back and damage the case.
Right.
And if we find that you did embellish and lie to us, all this cooperation goes out the window, and you won't get any credit for it. So he knew he had to take the straight and narrow.
Right.
But it was an education for me in terms of major narcotic dealers, the mindset of a drug CEO.
Right.
Vicious, cold-blooded killer. He was sentenced to 40 years in the Southern District of New York, 30 years in the state of New Jersey to run consecutively, which means he'd have to do his 40 years first. And once he finished his 40 years, he'd have to do his 30 years. And then he had a state case, a murder case in the Special Narcotics Court.
Okay.
And it took 2 hours. And I went to his resentencing. It took 2 hours for the judge to reduce him to time served.
Wow.
And he'd only served maybe about 4 years of that 70-year sentence.
Okay.
But after 2 hours, time served, and he had the case in Special Narcotics Court, a murder case. He had 3 witnesses against him. 1 witness disappeared before the trial. 1 witness changed his testimony on the witness stand and said, I don't recognize the guy that shot the guy. And the 3rd witness pointed him out and said, yeah, Frank Lucas is the guy that killed the guy.
Wow.
And he was found not guilty.
Wow.
Yeah, only to be let out and then tried to do another drug deal and went back to jail
He
for
went
about
back
10
in.
years.
Was he a cool guy? Was he a cool guy? Like, he portrayed in the movie as
He
pretty cool guy.
when you think about his era in the late 60s, early 70s, you think about really segregation in the country in New York City. So you had Small's Paradise up in Harlem, where all the black athletes and entertainers would go. So he would be up there with the black athletes and entertainers. When he went on trial, Joe Louis used to go in on the defense side and sit in his corner. His girlfriend during that time when we were with him was Billy Mays, who was Willie Mays, famous Say Hey Willie's stepdaughter, who had his wife had a club on Astoria Boulevard in Queens called Marguerite's Dugout. So he knew all the entertainers and celebrities. Everybody knew him, and that legendary picture of him with the fur link coat and the hat at the Ali Frazier fight and whatnot with all the celebrities and entertainers. So he knew everybody, and just listen to him. He got into business through Bumpy Johnson.
Bumpy Johnson, and then his competition was Nicky Barnes.
You got it. You got it. You got it. You got it. I mean, just listening to them, getting an education on how this thing goes. I mean, in the Nicky Barnes case, I mean, there were a bunch of us undercover agents. We'd go into the courthouse and get in the back and sort of, cover our faces, just listen to the testimony, how this thing goes, to get an education on your craft, to understand what worked, what doesn't work with these guys.
Priceless training, priceless.
Yeah, it is.
Did you see any remorse, or did Frank Lucas, do you think there was any remorse in what he did, or was it just pure greed?
Giovanni, that's a great question. The legend has it that, a woman testified about her son overdosed and he felt bad and, he said he was going to change his ways. I mean, you never know what's in a man's heart.
Right.
I could tell you he was the type of guy that he was sitting here now, he'd have everybody laughing.
Yeah.
He was a good storyteller.
Yeah.
He was good with people and whatnot, good social skills. You couldn't help but like the guy.
Right.
And he realized that, he's quick to make a decision on, hey, I'm telling a story about something that happened 30 years ago. Who's going to challenge me?
Right.
And-
Or don't get in my way while I'm making money.
Right, exactly,
Right?
exactly.
I'm a gentleman all day long, but if you get in my way and making money, then it's-
Cold-blooded killer,
Right.
cold-blooded killer, and he was in that business, and he was really willing to do what it takes to be the boss.
Right.
So when you think about drug trafficking in the United States, especially in New York in the late '60s, early '70s, you got to think about the mafia, and you got to think about the black drug dealers. And the story goes when Nicky Barnes was in jail with Joey Gallo, there became a friendship, okay, between the mafia guy and a major black drug dealer that, hey, we can all make money. So the mafia was able to import large amounts of heroin, okay, and they could give it to a guy like Nicky Barnes or Frank Lucas to distribute it throughout the city, okay, the 5 boroughs of New York City. And when DEA was formed in 1973, they looked at the black agents coming in to work undercover. And so that was our role right away, to work undercover.
Right.
And when you think about 1973, Nicky Barnes poses on the front cover of the Sunday Times magazine. And the story goes, President Carter calls Griffin Bell, who's the Attorney General, and is sort of undone by a major drug trafficker with a smile and a smirk and a suit on, smiling that, he's a major drug trafficker. He's no shame about it. He's on the front page of the Sunday New York Times. And the conversation goes from President Carter to Griffin Bell, I hope we got a good case on this guy. And so then there were 3 prosecutors when the Nicky Barnes case goes to trial, and one of the prosecutors was the U.S. Attorney, Bob Finch.
Okay.
Okay. But when you think about violence and drugs, The Nicky Barnes case is the first anonymous jury in the federal system.
Oh.
And why anonymous jury? Because these guys would kill witnesses.
Too powerful.
I mean, you read the reports when Frank Lucas was on trial, probably a dozen witnesses were killed before trial, because these guys knew back then, no witness, no testimony.
You're
So
talking
they
about
they didn't have to be 100% sure that X was going to be a witness. If they thought X knew too much and probably would, testify, they'd kill X. And so the United States government went into anonymous juries to protect the criminal justice system, to make sure that citizens knew that these organized crime guys were not more powerful than their own government.
Right.
an important message. I mean, these guys are so known, so powerful, and killed so many people, yet the U.S. Attorney's Office brings a case against them using cut, and we kind of skip past what cut is, but if you're going to cut methamphetamine, you buy MSM, buy a pound, break it down is a theory, right? Like whatever purity dope you have, you add a little bit of cut to this dope, the dope goes further. So they were going to prosecute these guys purely on a non-controlled substance case based on totality of the information and a bunch of cut.
Right, right.
Like that's a really interesting way in that time to go
It's
at.
innovative, first time
Yeah.
ever. But when you think about it, if you fast forward what was going on during that time, it was a way of figuring how we can use these laws to crush these major drug dealers. You know, I remember also there was a strategy in the Southern District where once you are convicted, you have no more Fifth Amendment privileges. So they would bring these guys back from prison after they were convicted and put them before the grand jury.
And just make them testify, huh?
And if they didn't testify, they went to jail for the life of the grand jury.
Right.
And once these guys go to jail, they can count to the day when they're going to be released. But the federal government was doing everything in their power to break the backs of these organized crime organizations, because citizens, you know, need to be able to feel that government can protect them and volunteer to testify. But if they think the crooks are more powerful than the government, then the criminal justice system goes out of the window. So you had some very innovative prosecutors, some very strong agents that were really committed to go toe-to-toe with these organized crime groups.
Yeah, because you didn't have examples back then. No. Right? You didn't have another case to go off of. No. So you truly, your era was so formative, right? You were trailblazers. I say it all the time with these guests that we have. You guys are trailblazers. I mean, the formative and the fact that you had the beginning of the DEA and you were able to experience that during your career, it's priceless in your experience.
It is. I mean, as I sit here and reflect, and especially what you guys are doing about Inside the Life, I mean, the undercover guys had a certain bond.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt.
Certain bond, you know. I remember talking to one of the legendary undercover guys in New York, you know, who was a mentor for me, you know, throughout my career, and especially when I went to Jamaica, when Jamaica was reporting it to Miami there. He was an Italian guy from the Bronx. And he would tell me, he said, Lew, when I'm negotiating with these guys on Pleasant Avenue, he said, I'm using my hands and talking real fast and whatnot. And he said, every now and then I go, and he said, I spit a big lungie on this guy's pants, you know, these nice silk sharkskin pants with the crease. He said, the guy would look at me, wanted to kill me. He said, but I keep talking. I keep talking like I didn't know what the hell I was doing. He said, but I knew exactly what I was doing. He said, but I'm Italian. He's Italian. He's disgracing my group. You know, that was my way of getting back.
Disrespect.
You know? Whoa.
Yeah.
Disrespect
Oh, yeah. I
to
see
my
it's
group.
personal to him.
Disrespect to my group. But the undercover guys had that special bond.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're all law enforcement. We're all trained in the academy. But when you go on that guy's territory, it's just you and him.
Yep.
It's just you and him. And the surveillance guys are out there, and you know it, and it's comforting. But hey, they're coming in after the fact when the shit
Things
is
break
already
bad.
hit the
There's
fan.
no call in timeout.
No, it already hit the fan. So it's you. So it's that special bond.
Yeah,
That, hey, you know, and the best supervisors we had, and we talked about that mental health component, would always tell the undercover guy, you may have met this guy 10 times before. Everything went well, gave him the money, this, that, and the other thing, fine. But when you go in there today, they would tell him, if there's something not right, you can't put your finger on it, but you're not feeling it. Walk out of there.
Right.
And the good supervisor would tell, nobody here is going to second guess you.
No way.
Nobody. You're the guy that got the instincts. You're the guy that's dealt with this guy. And sometimes you'll get that read that, you know, I've dealt with this guy 10 times in the last 6, 8 months. something ain't right.
But that one
walk
time,
away.
the cable bill's due, the phone bill's
That's right.
overdue, the mortgage, the baby needs shoes.
That's right.
You don't know what that guy's motive
That's
is.
right.
And Lou, you're a great guy.
Yeah.
Your business is always tight, but today I owe money,
That's
and it's
right.
I'm punching
That's
your
right.
number
That's
today.
right. That's
you know,
right.
and you don't know what goes on.
No, you don't. And you have to be empowered to just walk away.
Yeah.
Because you can't think about how am I going to explain it to these guys? They're not going to believe it. You know, we're a macho group and whatnot. But a good supervisor would say, hey, nobody's going to get hurt but you.
No.
Okay, you got the instincts.
But
You
sometimes
walk
it's hard to
away.
walk out.
Yeah, it is.
You know, it's not a simple
It's always hard
turnaround.
to walk out.
It's not a simple, you know what, I got to go. It's not as easy as we make it sound. The escape and the walking away clean with your head attached to your shoulders is just as difficult as going in.
It is, but once you get that in your head, you figure out the plan.
Yeah,
Once you have an oh shit moment or two,
you
happen
figure,
to
you
undercover.
figure out what this guy's saying, the way he's acting. Let me figure out a way to get out.
Yeah.
you
It's
know?
an orchestra. I
Yeah.
always say it's like an orchestra. We have so many different parts of our brain working at the same time. I want you to sit in a certain chair. I want him to do something. You're constantly the conductor of an orchestra.
But you make a good point, because what we would always tell guys, especially young guys, a drug dealer said he can get me some drug. Let's get some money. I said, the money is easy. Okay. We're an investigative agency.
Right.
Okay. We need to know who this guy is. So you need to meet him to have a discussion. You meet him in a public place. We get agents in there. He leaves in the car. We follow him, get the license plate, go to a house, and we got some records to check, phone number and whatnot, and know how this guy's living. Has he been arrested before? Was it for drugs? Was it for something else?
Right.
If it was for drugs, who was involved? Talk to the arresting officers to make sure we don't repeat the same scenario.
Right.
And make sure he is a drug dealer, because some guys, depending upon the informant, will sense you as a target of opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's more than just somebody says, I'll sell you large amounts of drugs. Let's get the money. Give it. So getting the money is the easy part. We got to make sure this is actual drug deal.
Right.
Because we want you to be protected.
Yeah. So it's a perfect time to wrap it up, Lou. I mean, we can go on for days and just sit here with you. I really wish we had more time. Thank you for sharing your insight, your career, or your success that you've had, and your amazing story. To us, it's just, I hope our listeners and our viewers just get a perspective on the impact that you personally have had on law enforcement, on bringing that mental health component that's forgotten, and all your success throughout your career. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you, Giovanni. And I just would like to say I was fortunate to work with a proud team, and Bush 1 coined it when he said America's heroes, men and women that the public don't know, that come to work each and every day with a gun and ready to lose their lives to protect other citizens that they don't even know. Okay, that's a strong commitment. And, a lot of times we hear some of the failings of law enforcement, but on any given day, if you're fortunate to go to an academy and see these young men and women, their disposition, getting in shape and training and practicing, so they do things on the street safe to protect fellow citizens. It's a blessing. And as you travel outside the United States, you realize that's the strength of our country.
Yeah.
People that get up every morning and try to do the right thing to help others. We make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but they're really committed. Thank you.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. And thanks for coming to Inside Life.
Without a doubt.
For behind-the-scenes photos, merchandise, and exclusive content, visit InsideTheLife.org. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get podcasts.